Avdiivka, and enraged by its helplessness in the face of the successes of the Russian armed forces, the Ukra Banderite regime, in its peculiar inhumanity, continues to take its anger out on Russian civilians. At the same time, they're actively using Western-supplied weapons to shell Russian cities and to carry out terrorist attacks. On February 21st, the armed forces of Ukraine have carried out a deliberate attack with the HIMARS system. They targeted the Kalinin Republican Clinical Hospital in the center of Donetsk. At the same very day, they shelled residential areas of Kyiv, Kuibyshev, and Kyiv city districts. The attack killed one woman and 7 people were wounded. On February 24th, Banderites again attacked with HIMARS system one of the restaurants in Donetsk where wedding celebrations took place. Fortunately, there were no casualties. On February 22nd, the Kyiv regime has carried out a drone attack, a regular bus in the Kherson region who was following the route Novaya Kakhovka-Topolovka. A driver and a passenger were wounded. February 25th, the armed forces shelled LPR and one civilian was killed as a result of it. The Kyiv junta still believes these regions and cities to be Ukrainians. And they explicitly say that residents of these regions are Ukrainian nationals. And nonetheless, they are ruthlessly bombing them. It's horrifying even to imagine what the Kyiv regime would do with these people if their plans would come true about the so-called return of those territories under their control. These plans will never come true, but it would be useful for you to understand what would happen if this plans will come true. Moreover, the Ukrainian fighters has carried out a mortar attack on Belgorod region by wounding 2 children. They also carried out a drone attack in Pachaeva. There were 3 civilian casualties, 4 people were wounded. All these atrocities of the Kyiv regime are carefully recorded by the Russian law enforcement agencies, and those responsible will inevitably be brought to justice. The Russian courts, based on the evidence collected by the Russian Investigative Committee, continue to pass sentences on Ukrainian fighters who committed grave crimes against civilians. The Ukrainian fighter from Azov Brigade, Bura, was convicted to life in prison for killing 3 civilians in March 2022 in Mariupol. Azov fighter Zhukov was also sentenced to life imprisonment in absentia for killing 4 people and for attempted murder of 3 people in March 2022 in Mariupol. Shabanov, Azov fighter, was sentenced to 28 years of prison for ordering to shell civilian infrastructure in March 2022 in the DPR. Azov fighter Stupnitsky was sentenced in absentia to 25 years in prison for killing a civilian in February 2022 in Mariupol. No one of Ukrainian criminals will await punishment, and they will be identified and will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. On February 24th, Western officials visited Kyiv again. This time, Kyiv was visited by the prime ministers of Belgium, Italy, and Canada, and they were accompanied by the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. They didn't come empty-handed. Ottawa and Kyiv signed an agreement on security cooperation, and this document promises Kyiv a financial military assistance worth $2.2 billion and another $125 million will be allocated for mine action, intelligence, medicine, development of Ukraine, and cyberspace. Just think about it. On the one hand, they allocate $2 billion in military assistance, and they allocate 20 times less on medicine and mine clearance. It's ridiculous. You understand very well that such the number and the volume of weapons that will be supplied and how many people will be killed or wounded after another cycle of violence. And 125 million US dollars are not enough to treat these people, to mitigate consequences of the decision to deliberately protract the conflict. It's just impossible, but they're still doing that. And why are they doing that? They demonstrate their so-called commitment to humanistic ideals. What are these humanistic ideals for which they allocate 20 times less money than on aggressive ideals? Belgium plans to open offices of the Belgian Development Agency in Kyiv and Kharkiv, and Italy entered into agreement with Ukraine on security cooperation. It is quite telling that several days earlier, the Italian Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Antonio Tajani, warned that this document is not legally binding and doesn't offer any guarantees of military and political support. It's quite an interesting wording. Why are they doing that? They just want to show to unhappy Ukrainian citizens who are recruited into armed forces by force that Europe is supporting them. But actually, all these documents are empty words and empty statements. Earlier, Kyiv signed with Copenhagen the similar document, and Denmark announced the 247.4 million euros package of military assistance for Ukraine. According to mass media, this year Denmark will provide at least 1.8 billion euros for Ukraine, and in the period between 2023 and 2028, Ukraine will receive 8.5 billion euros from Denmark. Great Britain and Poland also offered to clean European arsenals of remnants of expiring Soviet weapons and give them to the armed forces of Ukraine. Their goal is to provide this scrap metal to Ukraine and to replace it with the NATO weapons, providing new orders for the rich enterprises of the Western military-industrial complexes. That's humanism. Despite the symbolic nature of the so-called agreements on security guarantees and the lack of novelty, apart from providing additional military assistance to Kyiv by providing new weapons for Zelensky and new military equipment for Zelensky, the signing of such a document is yet another step in the hybrid war against Russia that they just confirm the Western resolve for a long-term confrontation with our country and unwilling to take the path of political and diplomatic settlement of the Ukrainian crisis. People are just obeyed to the White House, but not to people who voted for them. Ukrainian citizens believed that they were voted for democratic institutions having any talks with Moscow, and on February 25th at the Forum Ukraine Year 2024, the head of the office of the President, Andrei Yermak, confirmed that he admitted that Russia could take part in the peace summit, but provided that the Russian leadership is ready for a just settlement based on Zelensky's formula, which means that we need to accept the ultimatum to surrender. Again, Kyiv is unwilling to settle this crisis with political and diplomatic methods. This dichotomy, peace forum, and on the one hand, and abandoning of peace talks on the other hand, won't bring anything good. Zelensky's regime still think in terms of war, and they dream about inflicting a military defeat on Russia. They know the reality, but they are afraid to speak about the reality to themselves. So they are lying to their own people, to mass media. They diminish the number of losses. so that they could take more people of Ukraine and kill them on the battlefield. They want to get more money from Western sponsors to pillage this money, to pocket them later. All of these pseudo peacekeeping initiatives aim to conceal aggressive plans of Zelensky and to create a broad anti-Russian coalition in which they are trying to involve by deception states of Global South and East. February 26, Paris hosted the high-level conference on Ukraine, bringing together heads of state and government from more than 20 European countries. This event was intended to demonstrate the moral support and solidarity of Europe with Kyiv in the context of catastrophic military failures of Zelensky, but in reality it resembled a meeting of key donors of Ukraine who were about to determine the assistance that should be provided to Zelensky, its amount and its scale. I just recall that Washington has decided to shift the main burden on this assistance on NATO and EU countries due to American domestic problems. It seems that it's dictated by, this was the reason behind the presence of the American beholder, particularly the Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs. The results of the conference have shown that Europeans are seriously frightened by the prospects of the Ukrainian military collapse, and they are ready to do everything to avoid such a scenario. I understand that not all people in Western Europe are well educated enough to take this high-ranking positions when we talk about defense ministers, heads of states. We'll talk about it later. Some defense ministers and high-ranking military officials have a total lack of history knowledge, don't have good education, but you don't need to graduate from Yale University or Sorbonne University. You just need to know, no matter how much you're going to strike a horse, it's not going to move any further. Maybe you just start thinking about it, and Western people should start asking their government to whom they're sending their money. And what they are expecting to get in return from the Zelensky's regime that has totally lost control on the battlefield and the political space. And there is no visible or illusory victories. We read and watch a lot of materials every day. More and more absurd statements are made. But I believe what Macron said several days ago has just scratched the bottom of the barrel. You've probably heard the aggressive statements of the French president to send European forces to Ukraine and to establish the so-called coalition to supply Ukraine with long-range vessels. Well, that was work for public acclaim, to encourage the Kyiv regime, but not the regime itself, but send a message to people who are by force taken to military offices, that they are supported.
On the other hand, Macron didn't say anything new, and it's no secret that the military personnel of NATO countries are present in Ukraine and help the armed forces of Ukraine very actively. In particular, in the operation of Western weapon systems. And these are the NATO experts of Great Britain, the United States who are behind this. At the same time, it was the same President Macron who 2 weeks ago denied any kind of a presence, even a potential feasible participation of French mercenaries in the Ukrainian conflict. Do you remember how he said that mercenarism was prohibited by French law? So what was he talking about? I think he's not responsible for defense policy of EU as of now. He doesn't have the power, and he is only responsible for the future of his own citizens. So what did he have in mind? Behind such actions is the desire of the West to prolong the agony of the Zelensky regime, especially against the background of the growing shortage of weapons and personnel of the Ukrainian army. We have many questions and requests to comment on a New York Times article about the cooperation of the Ukrainian authorities with the CIA after the Maidan, which resulted in Kyiv becoming one of the most important partners of the United States in the fight against Russia. It surprises me because we have talked about all these facts. We talked about this even before this article came up. We have been talking about it for years, and I'd like to highlight that Kyiv started cooperating with the CIA not only after 2022, not after Maidan. It has been around for years, and the CIA specialists have already held posts in Ukrainian governments, parliaments, and so on. We were in direct charge of secret services, armed forces of Ukraine, and so on and so forth. According to this article, Washington helped to train Ukrainian spies who operated in Russia, Europe, Cuba, and other places where there's a significant Russian presence. That's what is said in the article, and this is nothing new either. The same calls about the alleged bombing, mining of educational facilities or hospitals of Russia were coming from Ukraine. So who is to blame? I don't think that this were some amateur hackers. This was organized crime. This telephone terrorism coming from the bankers, secret service officers, and so on, has been around for years, and it's conducted by Ukrainian citizens. This is not just fraudulent activity, it's more like extremism or terrorism, because what we have at hand is all the data about the users, personal data, telephone numbers, account details, addresses, names of our relatives, and so on and so forth. And there are people who provide this sort of data. So the leadership of such extremistic and terroristic activity, which is in full bloom at the territory of Ukraine and the control of the Kyiv regime. So this was born many years ago, and the American secret services and the British secret services helped them. According to the article, since 2016, 12 secret bases have been established in Ukraine. They are located along the border with Russia, and the Kyiv regime shared valuable intelligence information with Washington regarding Russia. After the start of a special military operation, cooperation with the CIA gained additional momentum. The special service began to engage in targeting the armed forces and supplying them other useful information, and that's what we have been talking about for years. I don't think that a month passed without us talking about the fact that the Americans and the British just help Ukraine using the tools of the Kyiv regime to strike blows against Russia. We gave you facts and focused on that. This information was also provided to the international community for international organization platforms. So there is no sensation here about this article. These are just sheer facts that have been known for years. At the same time, this could be a sensation to the American public, but this makes me wonder how the information blockade inside the US is organized so that the American citizens are the target. Are we now trying to block for your own citizens from obtaining such information, because those materials have been in circulation for quite some time? It is a surprise to me. The article emphasizes that at a certain stage the Kyiv regime began to be annoyed by the unjustified caution of the Americans. The Zelensky people started to show independence, organizing murders and other operations in their own discretion, for which the United States threatened to stop supporting the Zelensky regime. So let's focus on that. We have commented on that before. This is a very clumsy attempt at shifting the blame from the US, from the White House, from the Biden administration for the terroristic activity of Zelensky and his criminal entourage. But it's not possible to do so. If things were the way we are described in this article, then these horrible terroristic acts would have stopped after the very first or second time. However, the killings of Russian public figures, Russian journalists, terroristic acts against civilian infrastructure continue up to this day, and it's up to the United States to know that. I don't know about any kind of caution we're showing there. We didn't stop the person who we provided with large sums of money, large amounts of arms. We didn't stop him from conducting terroristic acts at the territory of Russia. And I will remind you, but while murders of leaders of Donbas militia are on the list of his crimes, it began a long time ago, and it's Zelensky and those who preceded him are to blame. Let me remind you, the commander of Sparta battalion at St. Pavlov, Nomdeger Motorola, was killed in October 2016. The commander of Somalia battalion, Mikhail Tolstay Nomdeger Givi, was killed in February 2017, and the Russian political scientist and journalist Daria Dugina was killed in August 22. Military commander Maxim Fomin, known as Vladimir Tatarsky, was killed in April 2023. This terrorist cell is responsible for Kyiv strikes on the Crimean Bridge in October 2022 and July 2023. You remember the deaths of civilians, which was linked to these terroristic acts. And the recent and very eloquent example of this is the attack with the help of American Patriot air defense system on the Il-76 military transport aircraft in the Belgorod region. So I think American journalists should not be ashamed. We should pose questions to the Biden administration about their engagement and link to all these crimes. On February 25th, Zelensky made statements about a tete-a-tete meeting on 2019 at the margins of a summit of Normand Foreman. Zelensky ignored President Putin's statement about the ceasefire. What does it tell us about? It tells us that Zelensky confirmed his unwillingness to fulfill his obligations under the Minsk agreements. He showed that Kyiv was not possible to fulfill its obligations under this contract, and showed that Russia was not the aggressor as the West is trying to make it look like, together with the Kyiv regime. All those factors speak for themselves and show the acuteness of the special military operations. Our goals will be achieved, as our leadership has said numerous times. And another monstrous fact from the reality we are facing at the territory which is controlled by the Ukrainian regime, the Federal Security Service already said that the local governments, together with the military, has talked about several together against the Russian special service officers who conducted so with an analog of a busy nerve agent, which is hinocylidase tribenzoate. Our secret services have already warned about this, and three Ukrainian citizens were arrested. We're talking about the breach of the first article of the Chemical Weapons Convention, which prohibits the usage of toxic chemicals as chemical weapons in the laboratory of the 27th Scientific Center of the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation when analyzing the samples of those materials seized from a cache at the territory of Zaporozhye Oblast in the ampoules discovered an analog of the chemical BZ controlled under the convention, and it has derivatives which are included in this list number 2 of the appendix on the convention of the prohibition of chemical weapons. Special services of Ukraine were instructed to conduct terroristic acts at the territory of Zaporozhye Oblast against the representatives of power of special services and the armed forces of Russia using chemical weapons by adding it to food, drinks, and so on. The goal was simple: to destabilize the power and the situation in this region. The terroristic Federal Security Service of Russia has launched a criminal case on the Article 355 of the Criminal Code of Russian Federation. Such incidents are a vivid example of the crimes conducted by the Kyiv regime and their special services, and we add to the picture which was already drawn with, in October 2023. It was made public with toxic chemicals and control chemicals were used as means of warfare by special services of Ukraine and Ukrainian militants. The usage of such toxic chemicals by the Kyiv regime is not a one-off. It's truly alarming that Ukrainian terrorists turned out to have those chemicals, which are some kind of endemics for the military chemical program of the US. So it means that apart from the US, we are not produced anywhere else, and we were all only used by the Pentagon, which indicates the individual leaders of Ukrainian special services and the Kyiv regime who are directly engaged in terroristic activities of their proteges, be the rocket and artillery shelling of civilian infrastructure and civilians, or the usage of poisons in terroristic and military purposes in the violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention. We will follow the data which comes up in this sphere by our special services. We will also discuss this in international forums and platforms, but I'd like to say that it's another example of such a process of double standardization of all things happening. I think we remember how cautious the Western regimes were about everything which had to do with combat chemicals in Salisbury and Amesbury. And it looks like they're silent today. Why nobody came to ran to the microphones in the British Parliament as Theresa May did when she saw the data provided to her by the British Special Services about the alleged usage of chemical weapons at the territory of Ukraine, as they claimed Russia did. Do you remember the wording back then? We said that it was a terroristic act against Europe, against the UK, and today. And let me remind you that Ukraine is Europe as well. Is it of no interest to anyone in the EU, in NATO? So what kind of chemical did they find? What kind of chemical is that? The United States have no desire to pose this question up for discussion in Congress. It has to do with another American program. the way it was with biological laboratories, the presence of which the America had to admit. We have evidence now. Does no one want to pose a question to the Pentagon, State Department, the White House? So what do the United States want to do this time at the territory of Ukraine? And let me remind you of the way it was back when the situation around the convention, the Chemical Weapons Convention, how the situation unfolded. It was beneficial to the West because March this year marks the 6th anniversary of the scandalous incident in Salisbury. Then the British side posed, and I remember it very well because it followed, I would say, a sinusoid scenario. I think it took off vertically because the British side posed it as an intentional poisoning of an ex-military intelligence officer, Sergei Skripal, and his daughter Yulia. And this incident was used by London to deploy a large-scale anti-Russian political propaganda campaign with a goal of international isolation of Russia and folding the bilateral relations. We were condemned and punished basically simultaneously because Russian diplomats were revoked. And the British leadership have been refusing to conduct dialogue with us. They do not want to provide us with samples of those nerve agent which is alleged to have poisoned the Skripals. After the Salisbury incident, London refused to cooperate with Russian relevant agencies on looking into the case, and as a retaliatory measure of sending requests by the General Public Prosecutor's Office of Russia to the Minister of Inner Affairs of UK, the Foreign Office informed our embassy on the decision of the British authorities to turn down the relevant Russian requests. And from the provocation, since the provocation in Salisbury, the Embassy of Russia in London sent more than 60 notes to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Great Britain. These notes include many questions on the Skripal case. However, we did not receive any answers to these questions. Otherwise, we were rude in giving the formal answers. This shows us that the British, without waiting for the results of investigation, went into the streets of the capitals of all the European capitals and made these countries send the Russian diplomats away, promising them to give them facts later. Later on, the journalists acquired made their allies say that Russia was to blame. We had about 5 pages which looked skull-like, and they said that Russia did so because it had done so before and it will do so in the future. That was it. We had no pictures. We had no evidence. There was nothing. Later on, no NATO country ever provided any evidence, but they did send the Russian diplomats away. Why did they do so? Because later on, we believed the word of the British services. However, some did doubt this and did not send the Russian diplomats away. But later on, they asked us whether we were provided with any evidence, any facts, apart from the statements made by London. And you remember that we were made in this highly likely fashion. And we were given a negative answer. London never gave anything to them.
So Great Britain has just brazenly deceived their allies. There is still no reliable information that Great Britain can provide to anyone, to us, or to their closest allies. The reason is simple. They have something to hide, or they have no evidence, or both. So we're going to do our best to establish the truth. We are still seriously concerned over the fate of Russian citizens, and we regularly appeal to British authorities to provide the relevant information and to ensure the consul access in line with the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations of 1963 and Bilateral Consular Convention of 1965. Facts indicate that it is the British who are not interested in a fair and impartial investigation in the Skripal's case. It's the same with Denmark, Sweden, and Germany, who are not interested in holding transparent, fair, and legal investigation with what happened to Nord Stream 1 and 2. London has delayed and politicized investigation, and the situation has actually confirmed the tailor-made nature of the situation, and its purpose was to inflict damage to the international standing of Russia and its bilateral ties. I would like to say a few words about the statement of Emmanuel Macron on sending troops to Ukraine. After seeing this broad international response to Macron's statements as a result of the meeting of European leaders in support of Ukraine that was organized in Paris on February 26, I've just commented this topic several minutes ago, but I would like to add I'm beginning to think that Paris is totally losing its grip of reality and sense of self-protection. Over the past years, it has been acting to the benefit of Washington and EU and NATO, and it acted to the detriment of national interests. The Elysee Palace has been drawing its country in the Ukrainian conflict. We have repeatedly stated that France is an accomplice in the war crimes of the Ukrainian regime. France was one of the first to supply Kyiv with NATO ammunition, initiated the establishment of tank and artillery coalitions, and the coalition to supply long-range missiles. It supports the delivery of combat aviations and actively is involved in the training of armed forces of Ukraine. It panders to sending mercenaries. They are actively sending mercenaries to the Kyiv regime. And the Macron statements have confirmed it. It has resulted in the escalation of hostilities, which is absurd in the background of Macron's statements about some kind of peacekeeping efforts that France is taking. They are trying to put it into a political and diplomatic space, but we have got used to this contradictory, controversial statements made by the Elysee Palace, made by the French president, by the foreign ministry of this country. Well, it seems like they don't care what to say, because unfortunately, civilians are suffering. Many people are killed because of the Paris position and because of the assistance. Well, actually, it's not assistance, and because of the financial support and weapons that France is providing to the Kiev and Nazi regime. People are dying. Now Paris makes it clear that the West doesn't rule out the outright military confrontation with our country. EU countries at the level of foreign ministries, defense ministers, even heads of state declared that they haven't initiated, they don't plan. And even the German representatives say that they understand that it is futile, it is dangerous to make such statements. It demonstrates that it's a total ideological, philosophical dead end of the Western approach to global affairs. Just imagine the intra-bloc discipline of NATO that doesn't allow countries to pursue their own independent policy without giving due regard to the defense policy of NATO. And now you can hear these statements in other NATO countries have to make their excuses about such statements. Actually, we're talking about a crisis within the Western community. They are unable to work out a common ideology and concept that would be based on democratic principles to the key existential problems. The use by the Western states of Ukraine as an instrument of war against Russia until the last Ukrainian and turning this country into the testing ground for the NATO weapons and military equipment could become a prelude to them joining military activities. We'll speak about it later. The question is, do French nationals and other citizens of other EU countries realize where can the current residents of the Elysee Palace lead them to? Or other administrations in other EU and NATO countries? Can you imagine that? The French Parliament, the French public have no understanding what President of France has in his mind. He didn't discuss it with anyone. No one advised him to say shaking because of what it might be drawn into after saying that. Do people want to become cannon fodder so that by quoting Alexander Pushkin, they will know their brethren graves in the Russian soil? Again, I'm quoting the great Russian poet Alexander Pushkin. Are they ready to support their president in a reckless scheme that will have the gravest and the most unpredictable consequences? I believe that French nationals should seriously reflect on that and ask a question to their government. So going on, the statement of the Inspector General of Bundeswehr, Breuer, about the need for the armed forces of Germany to reach the combat readiness in 5 years. I have to confirm again that we notice growing militarism in Germany, and at the suggestion of the supreme political leadership of Germany, the idea of the upcoming military confrontation with Russia is again instilled into the public opinion. We closely follow the German military preparations that are first and foremost are targeted against our country. But I would like to stress that on the German border, France has just recently made the statements that should be evaluated in terms of German interests and to understand, are they pursuing a consolidated policy? Are they advising each other? Or in this Russophobic frenzy, any statement is enough if it's aimed against Russia? And the statements made by Inspector General and actions taken by Germany, we will respond to them appropriately. And as for Mr. Breuer and his political inspirator, we would like to remind them that they are not the first ones who dreamt about achievement of wartime combat readiness by armed forces of Germany. Every time it ended with Germany's catastrophe. And some news from the past, unfortunately, that have stricken the Eastern and Western Europe. Sofia has recently was the place where the neo-Nazi gathering took place, the so-called Lukov March, in the memory of the Bulgarian collaborationist General Hristo Lukov. And this militant gathering takes place in the center of Sofia for more than 20 years. It glorifies the accomplice of Adolf Hitler and copies the torchlit marches of the Nazis Germany. Over the past years, Bulgarian authorities said that they just don't accept the ideas of organizers and they didn't have enough courage to take resolute steps to put an end to them. Maybe all these marches are part of the same policy, going back again to what Inspector General said. They want to They don't want to confront another crazy step, which is the desecration and destruction of a memorial that is common for both Russia and Belgrade. But remember the statements that were made by the Russophobic wing of Bulgaria, that it made us think that they're not going to preserve any memorial that is dedicated to both Bulgarian and Soviet soldiers. They have no grounds to do that. And again, they acted in defiance of the court ruling. Today, the Bulgarian followers of the Hitlerites adopted the Russophobic narratives of the authorities and marched under the slogan of victims of communist regime. At the same time, some representatives of the Sofia's municipal council called mayor's office to ban the Russian embassy to hold events on the occasion of the Defender of the Fatherland Day that, in its sense, to some point is related to the memory of the victory over fascism and the Great Patriotic War. We are deeply alarmed by the rehabilitation of Nazism, which is strengthened by the Sofia's active support for the Kyiv regime that is actively involved in this ideology. It reflects the continuing, ongoing moral degradation of ruling elites in countries of the European Union and NATO and might lead to catastrophic social and political consequences in these states and might result into greater international consequences. I just would like to recall that recently the Supreme Court of Italy decided that it is acceptable to use the Italian salute when the arm is raised in the salute that was for 80 years was associated with Nazism and fascism. There are so many small details who make this grim and horrible picture, Nazi puzzle. But the positive hopes and outlooks are provided by the responsible approach of the global majority. They clearly realize the danger and counter it. There is still hope in the world, and it is demonstrated by the voting on the draft resolution that is every year initiated by the Russian Federation in the UN General Assembly. It is the resolution combating glorification of Nazism, neo-Nazism, and other practices that contribute to fueling contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. The problem is that the global majority supports the resolution, co-sponsors it or votes for it, but the collective West collectively opposes it and votes against it. Moldova, we continue to closely follow the situation in this country that its leadership has got literally mired in the destructive Russophobic policy of double standards, and we see that their political policies increasingly diverge from the real state of affairs. This manifests itself most clearly in the official position of Moldova regarding the special military operations. Its second anniversary has become the pretext for a new series of hysterical, baseless accusations against our country of terror and diabolical aggression. They have made up so many things, and they have just started this hysteria in Chisinau. At the same time, the leadership of Moldova still doesn't want to hear anything about the genocide of Donbass residents from 2014 to 2022. You can use this word as a legal term, or you can use the term as I don't know, as a metaphor that would reflect the best way what happened there. in Donbass. They don't want to hear anything. The regime, the Maya Sandu regime, doesn't want to hear anything about other crimes committed by the Kyiv regime. Another examples are the attempts of Moldovan authorities to justify the purchase of NATO military weaponry with the Russian threat and irrelevance of the neutral status of Moldova enshrined in its constitution. On February 18th, the defense minister of Moldova, Anatoly Nasata, declared that since Russia has totally violated the concept of neutrality by attacking Ukraine, it's unclear to what extent this neutral status protects Moldova. The government of Moldova announced plans to create the national air defense system until 2030, which would require several billion euros. And they also declared the acquisition of a second radar to monitor Moldova's airspace, which is worth 15 million euros. It should be taken into account that Moldova is among the poorest countries in Europe, and the reality of the Russian threat raises questions from the collective West. I will cite you an example which would be quite relevant for the Maya Sandu regime. The U.S. ambassador in Chisinau, Kent Logsden, stated on February 21st that there is no evidence or sign that Moldova is threatened with military attack from Russia. And the regime of Maya Sandu, its ministers and heads of agencies chanted as a mantra, double standards manifest with regard to history. The acts of vandalism against Soviet war memorials remain without any proper response from the country's leadership. It is the tacit support. Their Guards Captain Andrei Kolbinsky. The Moldovans are regularly told about the horrors of the Soviet era, and now the Ministry of Education of Moldova decided that the school curriculum will now have a new course where children will be told about, I quote, repressions of the totalitarian communist regime. We have been speaking about the time when Moldova was part of the Soviet Union time and again, and here are some facts of the Soviet terror in Moldova, which we'd like to share with the authors of this course. First, 1945, 1944, when the Great Patriotic War was ongoing, the Soviet Union allocated 448 million rubles from its budget for the reconstruction of Moldova. Other Soviet republics granted 20,000 tons of ferrous metals, 226,000 tons of black coal, 51,000 tons of petroleum products, 17.4 tons of seeds. Maya Sandu, are you going to tell that to children, or you're going to ban this information as you are banning any information that doesn't substantiate your Russophobia? Second, 1970, 1980, the Moldovan SSR was rightfully considered as the Union's fruit and vegetable garden, and its main exports were fresh and processed agricultural produce. Since 1945 to 1990, the production of canned fruits and vegetables has grown from 28 to 728,000 tons. So it has increased 26 times, to be exact. Third, thanks to the construction of large power generation facilities, the production of electricity in the Moldovan SSR has increased from 100 million kilowatt hour in 1950 to 17 billion kilowatt hour in 1989. Fourth, the Soviet Union contributed to the development of mechanical engineering, including tractor production, production of electricity generating sets, electric machines, including light industry, especially the production of footwear and knitwear. And I truly hope that all this information will be visibly presented when this course will be taught to the Moldovan children, when they will tell about the repressions of the totalitarian communist regime.
Yes, there were many problems, there were many bad things, but when we're going to cross the data or facts or numbers out, those data which indicates the development of the Moldovan Republic of the USSR, this is going to hit the history of the Moldovan people, because these are the achievements of the people who lived and worked at this territory. These people are Moldovan by ethnicity, or they belong to other ethnicities, but they saw this republic, saw this land as their own. And what does Maya Sandu do? She has already stripped the Moldovan of their language. She renamed it into Romanian, and now she's also stripping them of their history, of their historical achievements, the history of their labor, of their hardworkiness. Who gave her the right to do so? We think that it's important to talk about the language issue. On the February 21st, the president of Moldova, Maya Sandu, said that, quote unquote, just think about it, Romanian language in Moldova is a bridge for dialogue between all communities, quote unquote. Yes, I understand, but even though the trend of calling the people of the same gender another gender is gaining momentum, we can say that Romanian language in Moldova can also become a bridge for dialogue between all communities. But let me name all these communities to you, because the paradox is that, first of all, the majority of Moldovan citizens think they speak Moldovan and not Romanian. Secondly, about 80% of them speak Russian. Thirdly, about 7%, not 70 or 17% of the citizens of Moldova are ethnical Romanians. So the absurdity of the linguistic policy of the Chisinau authority is evident. The Moldovans see that the leadership is very far from the real life of the people. We say that we do not accord with them, but nobody listens. Maya Sandu talked about democracy and liberty being humane values, but she probably tricked all of them. The Moldovan people see the attempts to dismantle the sovereignty and the national identity of a country. They see the disruption of ties with Russia, which is posed as some kind of a European project, but this is no European project. Or shall I say, Europe had many projects. Hitler, Nazism, fascism were also European projects. So what are they trying to engage Moldova in? Russia, in its turn, is always ready to continue the cooperation with our Moldovan friends because we have historical amicable ties. And a few words about the disruption of ties. It's for many years that we have already paid attention to the fact that in the spotless effort to destroy ties with Russia and the CIS, and these ties have been being built for a decade, the Moldovan leadership is coming farther from the reality and the interests of their own citizens. Another example of this is the recent statements made by the government of Moldova about the fact that the international contracts signed in the CIS now do not respond to the current state of affairs because the policy of Moldova does not correlate to the goals set in these contracts by the signatory countries. I think that's a masterpiece. And now let's talk about the goals of these contracts which do not correspond to the policy of Moldova. I will talk about the documents which the Chisinau thought was irrelevant. The Maya Sandu regime said that the Convention on Cooperation, the fight against the circulation of counterfeit medicines, or Convention on Public Health Protection are irrelevant now, but Moldova say that the situation around public health leaves much to be desired. It's not Moldova, no, it's not Moldova, it's Maya Sandu who doesn't need the convention on the cooperation of CIS member states in case of evacuation to citizens from third countries, in case of emergency situations. I think that instead of this, Moldovan citizens will be asked to use commercial flights as it was done when evacuating people from the Palestinian-Israeli conflict zone. How many people were evacuated in emergency states or in 2020? By Russia without any preliminary agreement. Nobody counted anything. We just held out a helping hand. We helped them. How many families with Moldovan or Russian passports were saved? Does anyone need these people now anymore? I'm talking about the leadership of Moldova. Moldova is also planning to cancel the Convention on Exchange of Information in Emergency Situation of a Natural and Man-Made Nature and Information Cooperation Exploitations Consequences and aiding the victims. So what is wrong about this convention? At the same time, the unprecedented snowfall which took place in Chisinau in January, was combated through Russian and not European equipment. And this denunciation of cooperation on creating a shared scientific and technological environment by CIS countries and creating a shared educational environment is quite clear because the scientific and technical potential left as a legacy of the USSR is just diminishing, and the number of students which enter the universities of this country this year is diminishing as well. So these conventions were also deemed irrelevant. And as we see that the route to European Union lies through restrictions on professional activity of journalists, and that's why the country left 2 agreements on the activity of interstate television and radio company Mir. And it's just another example. Of course, the comments are ironical to some extent, but we should understand that in practice, the thoughtless disruption of agreements which were reached in those recent years in such important areas will have negative consequences for Moldovans to a bigger extent than to the government. And one should understand that one should not be smart to denounce these agreements by burning those important social bridges, but the Moldovan authorities should understand that to renew their participation in these contracts, it will be more difficult than denouncing them. And that's why British crimes in Afghanistan, we see new evidence of crimes committed in Afghanistan by the Western countries, in particular by British military personnel, are coming up. They are irrefutable in the independent national investigation of the activity of British personnel at the territory of Afghanistan. An ex-veteran affairs minister, Junior Mercer, who is himself a NATO Afghanistan campaign veteran, confirmed the facts of a criminal attacks of the British military personnel against the Afghan civilians. Any requests to the army leadership on that subject were ignored, and as Johnny Mercer said, after him being voted for in 2017, he was told twice not to talk too much. And when in 2019 he became a minister, he was stripped of a right to find the truth. He also confirmed the extrajudicial killings of civilians by the British Special Forces, and they said that the civilians were of no threat. He also talked about the wide practice of usage in Afghanistan of an unregistered arms. The ownership of those could not be traced. And it's alarming and horrifying that the government of Britain does everything what it takes to conceal the truth about the crimes of British military personnel in Afghanistan. It probably explains the delays in providing visas for the ex-military personnel who possess the evidence of shootings of Afghan civilians, and according to the data owned by BBC, about 2,000 visa requests by the Afghanians are blocked. We call on official London and its NATO allies not to cover up military criminals, and we hope it will become witnesses to impartial and transparent investigation which will result in the punishment of those who are to blame. The relatives of those who were killed and became victims of these crimes should see the justice. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about the crisis. We're also talking about the protests of farmers which happened in more than half a countries of the European Union. We are talking about rising prices for feed, fertilizers, food inflation, competition from cheap foreign agricultural products, primarily Ukrainian ones, which are of low quality and which European agricultural producers cannot withstand, a decrease in rural living standards and profitability of production, increased risks of bankruptcy and ruin of farms. And it has been said repeatedly with facts at hand, but these are direct consequences of anti-Russian sanctions. We gave you lots of data, statistics, facts. And it's part of strategic mass calculations of the European Union leadership in the energy, food, and financial spheres. A separate inspection of European farmers is caused by a reduction in the volume of state subsidies, which were sacrificed to financial assistance packages for Ukraine and draconian green standards in agriculture. Among the key requirements of the farmers' protest is to reduce agricultural imports from third countries. A separate meeting of the Council Ministers of Agriculture of EU member states was devoted to the crisis in the EU agricultural sector. It took place on February 26 this year. And what is the result? The Brussels bureaucracy has painstakingly made a number of tactical concessions of cosmetic nature. A moratorium on compliance with a number of EU environmental standards has been extended. We are correcting it when it comes to agriculture. The project on reducing the use of populars, which is unpopular among farmers, has been removed from the agenda, and a separate survey of farmers regarding their concerns has been announced. But you understand perfectly well that everything will ameliorate now. All the problems will be solved. The purpose of a declared plebiscite is obvious: to give the opportunity to let off steam to the rapidly impoverished EU agricultural producers. And what about the main concern of European farmers, which is related, in fact, to the uncontrolled import of Ukrainian agricultural products into the EU? Contrary to the direct demands of the participants of the mass protests that swept through the European Union, the EU Council supported the proposal of the European Commission to extend the regime of duty-free and quota-free food trade with Ukraine. So can I pose a question now? Tell us, please, is it true that the European Union is built in a democracy because democracy is the will of the majority while taking into account the interests and the will of the minority? Bear in mind the fact that these countries are live of agriculture, and the agriculture is the basis of the economy for the majority of countries of the European Union. When are we going to take their will into account? Why do they adopt a decision which is contrary to the opinion of the majority? Certain restrictions were made, especially in relation to such sensitive goods for the EU as chicken meat, sugar, and oddly enough, chicken eggs. But in order to limit the availability of products which the protesters throw at European politicians who with irrational persistence undermine the foundations of the agricultural sector of your own countries. The motives for such extensions are purely political. They have nothing to do with the reality, with the claims of the people. So what do they want to do? All those European bureaucrats, they want to give Kyiv the opportunity to earn and to pay off Western creditors. And these are Brussels and Washington who created such an astonishing story when they talk about new expenses at aim aid in Ukraine, and this is we do so as a kind of a loan. We have to pay off the persons, but they have nothing to pay with because we have nothing but losses. So for such a simple way, through buying agricultural produce from Kyiv regime, we try to help them pay off the creditors. And I think that was some kind of a fraudulent activity in Europe, because bearing in mind that for 2 years, the West has been talking about food security, which Russia is posing a threat to, allegedly. European and transnational agro cooperation, which brought up Ukrainian agriculture at the root, should continue to fill their pockets by importing agricultural products from Ukraine at dumping prices. And what does it have to do with European citizens, European farmers? I don't understand. European farmers have actually become a bargaining chip in a big political game. In their defense, Europeans are trying to blame Moscow, for sure, for all the troubles, both low prices for food products supplied from Ukraine to the EU and related problems in the EU agricultural market. We propose to solve all difficulties under the slogan of combating the Russian threat, which has become familiar to the European Union. They argue that Ukrainian agricultural products urgently needs to be returned to the world markets only because Russia fills the vacant niche. So, what does it have to do with food security? We wanted to feed the whole planet, or maybe the whole universe, and now we see that food is also divided on political criteria in the right ones, which the planet could be fed upon, and the politically irrelevant and untrustworthy. So we don't have no time to think about the real needs of European farmers. It's impossible to allow Moscow to receive additional income by supplying high quality and competitive products to global markets. That's for sure, but because according to their plans, by this time, we should have no agricultural complex, or it should be fully dependent on the will of the West. So you see what problem arose. We do have a complex like this. At the same time, it is proposed to show the initiative to Ukraine itself, we magically making it so that its agricultural experts still make their way through the European Union and other countries and not get lost in the expenses of the European Union. I think this is a masterpiece. It's a theater of absurd. It's the Bolshoi theater of absurd. So, the same thing can be said about the entire policy of European Union in relation to the so-called Europe, but it has not yet. The disproportionate losses of the own farmers are nothing more than collateral damage to the pro-Ukrainian hysteria that has engulfed the European Union. And at the same time, once we started talking about the problems of the agricultural complex, let's see. Let's look at the situation on the world. We admit, and we do so regrettably, that the political factors affect the situation negatively, and countries, including the U.S., actively engage in using the financial, trade, investment, and other tools to achieve their foreign policy goals. They use the non-market competition measures, which basically a trade war. It's a direct pressure on foreign businesses present in our country, pressure on our international partners, and direct discrimination of Russian companies in the West. I think it will turn 1,000 years soon. More than 18,000. I thought it was 12,000, but no. Together with under-sanction measures, we see what we're moving 80,000 anti-Russian restrictive measures have been adopted. And such actions clash with the economic interests of the majority, of a world majority, and can lead to problems in global economy. At the same time, we see that Russia is confidently coping with massive pressure of a collective West. Global economy, at the same time, in its turn, is in the turbulent zone, and it's according to the prognosis of the IMF, the increase of the global GDP this year will not precede the results of the previous year and will turn to amount to 3.2%.
There is a growing struggle between key economic players and interstate associations over control of transport and logistical and production values, access to sales markets and resources in the world. Unprecedented restrictions imposed by the West have accelerated the transfer by many countries of their international payments in national currencies, and such measures have boosted the process of de-dollarization of global economy, establishment of payments and settlement mechanisms independent from the West, and the multi-currency economic foundation is gradually being laid for a future multipolar world order free from neocolonial dictate, ultimatums, and unilateral sanctions on the part of the United States and their satellites. The global crisis of credibility that is provoked by the Western countries drives the process of systemic rethinking and reformatting of global economic ties. Agenda is focused on the new mechanisms of cooperation in exchange for those instruments that the West has traditionally been using to support and to strengthen its dominance to the detriment of developing countries. In many advanced economies, there is a trend of deindustrialization and increased unemployment rate, and the most graphic example is the German economy that with the continues to pursue the anti-Russian sanctions policy and irreversibly losing its position as an engine for European economy. And despite the anticipated decrease in global average inflation, and the most graphic example is the German economy that with the continues to pursue the anti-Russian sanctions policy and irreversibly losing its position as an engine for European economy. And despite the anticipated decrease in global average inflation rate, experts do not rule out that geopolitical risks might lead to a new price spike, which we've been talking about. And there are growing social tensions because of that. The vivid illustrations of the negative impact that anti-Russian restrictions have is the disbalance of the global food market, and Western sanctions and restrictions on the export of food, fertilizers, and fuel from Russia has led to the price spike on electricity, food, and other essential commodities all over the world. And on February 23rd, at the initiative of the Ukrainian side, the Albanian chairmanship of the Black Sea Economic Cooperation Organization, BSEC, has organized an extraordinary formal meeting of the Committee of Senior Officials of the Black Sea Economic Cooperation. What was it about? It was about the second anniversary of the Russian special military operation. This event was convened with numerous procedural violations, and it became a flagrant example of the unscrupulous and politically engaged approach of Albania to meeting its obligations as BSEC's chairman. We regret that instead of maintaining the positive working momentum that was provided by Serbia and Turkey last year, Albanian colleagues preferred from the very beginning to slide into inciting confrontation and politicization of the forum that were entrusted to chair. Especially blasphemous was their decision to convene this meeting in the Defender of the Fatherland Day, the holiday that celebrates the contribution of the Red Army to the liberation of Europe from Nazism in 1945. And this decision, this is what the Russian soldiers are doing in the zone of special military operation today. We are encouraged that the short-sighted approach of the Albanian chairmanship in BSEC and some of its members are not shared by the absolute majority of states that call on to adhere to the social and economic mandate of BSEC in the interest of preserving the relevant mechanisms of multilateral regional cooperation. From our part, we have presented our position in the context of the origins of the Ukrainian crisis. We have revealed its root causes, and we have spoken in detail about Americans benefiting from armed actions in Ukraine and sanctions initiated by them that have totally deprived the European Union from economic competitiveness. On the official website of our ministry, soon you will find the statement made by the director of the Department of Economic Cooperation, Mr. Birichevsky, on this topic. You will find the link to this statement in the text of the briefing. Sports news. From February 21st to March 3rd, Kazan is hosting the international multi-sports tournament, Games of the Future. Games are organized in an open format for all interested states and brings together athletes from more than 100 countries of the world. And the opening ceremony, which united the Russian president, it was attended by the presidents of Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. These events have become a remarkable event of international scale. Several countries have already expressed their willingness to hold the next tournaments on their territory to develop the digital movement initiated by Russia, and these competitions have reaffirmed the Russia status as the world sports power that develops international sports cooperation on depoliticized basis in the spirit of true values of sports and Olympism. Such a success couldn't help our so-called well-wishers in the West to stay indifferent and so we're talking about the so-called sports. We have noted the decision of the Latvian Hockey Federation to revoke the license of Latvian athletes. They have started the real bullying campaign of their athletes. They have disregarded the fundamental principles of Olympism and standards in international sports. They are taking actions against their own athletes who represent Latvia at international tournaments. Under absurd pretext, Latvian authorities use instruments of political influence to intimidate their own population. Over the past years, Riga, I don't even know how to put it. Riga has posted so many fake news, have been politicizing these affairs so many times, and makes more out of an anthill. We are talking about the punishment of athletes for what they are doing. They are doing sports, they are showing their talents. They have dedicated their lives to that. They are competing. Such acts are regretful, sincerely regretful. And these actions are flagrant and blatant because they are acting against their own populations. Authorities have again demonstrated their Russophobic sentiments, and they are ready to act to the detriment of their country and their own citizens by putting spokes in our wheels. Well, I understand everything. Everything can be compared, but we have what to compare what they are doing because all the spokes will be broken. We have everything is okay with our movement forward. Maybe they are masochists because first and foremost, they are injuring their own citizens and their own country. We believe that sports is a unique instrument for developing and strengthening social linkages, for building a mutually respectful dialogue, and it should unite and bring together peoples in our country in this regard, despite the pressure exerted by international sports structures led by the International Olympic Committee and international sports federations is making headways. We continue to develop sports cooperation with our partners and we create new formats of competitions that are taking place in the spirit of fair competitions without discrimination against sportsmen. And we're going to do that, and we don't care if someone doesn't like it. And as for the punishment of athletes for their participation in competitions, is just another example of politicization of sports, which leads to the fragmentation of international sports family and the murder of sports. And another example how they can cast a blow on themselves. 100 years ago, the Soviet Union and Austria have established consular relations, February 25th, and diplomatic relations, February 29th. This story, the history of Russia-Austrian relations, is rather rich, and it goes back to the end of the 15th century, but when with the first exchange of embassy missions in 1489 between Ivan III and Frederick III. Over the 100 years, bilateral relations have experienced so many things, and we would like to highlight one important historical fact that thanks to the firm position of the Soviet leadership, Austria has obtained its statehood in May 1955. Now we can speak about this cooperation that it was in the past because the Austrian leadership has chosen the path of confrontation with our country. It has abandoned traditional neutrality and have taken opportunistic steps to the detriment of pragmatism that was peculiar to Austria for so many years. We hope that responsible and sensible politicians in Austria will finally realize that there is no alternative to supporting the equitable and mutually beneficial dialogue with Russia. And another important date, on February 11th and 19th, 1959, the Zurich and London agreements were signed between the United Kingdom, Greece, Turkey, Greek and Turkish Cypriot communities. They resulted in the establishment of the Republic of Cyprus in August 1960. Its independence was seriously limited from the very beginning. London, Athens, and Ankara have obtained the status of guarantors of a new state and opportunities to intervene in its domestic affairs. And the Greek and Turkish military contingents were deployed on the island, and the United Kingdom has retained two areas with a total area of 99 square kilometers or 256 square kilometers as sovereign bases and some of other facilities and a whole range of privileges as a former mother country. And these agreements has actually had dangerous potential for conflict, which in the most dramatic way manifested itself in the bloodiest intercommunal confrontations in December 1963 and thereafter, and in 1974 has led to the tragic division of the island. The atavism of the colonial era preserved in the Zurich and London hasn't gone away, and it helped the British even today to aggressively conduct in the region and to ignore the international law and to use the military force without the approval of the UN Security Council. All of that, with no doubt, undermines regional stability, foments tensions on the island and around it, and doesn't help to settle the protracted Cypriot problems. The Soviet Union has repeatedly stated that the British authorities have imposed the plan of settling the Cypriot issue, but actually they didn't seek to help but strengthen their dominance in new historical context to sow discord and enmity between Greek and Turkish Cypriot communities. And the Russian Federation, as a responsible participant of international community and a permanent member of the UN Security Council, has firmly and consistently adhered to the principle in line with which the compromise on the Cypriot problem could be achieved as it is stipulated in the relevant resolutions of the UN Security Council through voluntary negotiations of the Cypriot communities with a mandatory and careful consideration of legitimate concerns and interests without external influence, pressure, timelines, and recipes. Today is the day of Arctica on February 28th. It is celebrated on February 28th. Its main objective is to promote Arctic expeditions, scientific research. It draws attention to the problems of conserving nature of this unique region, and its distinctive culture, as well as ensuring livelihoods of Arctic communities. The Arctic region has a rich diversity of natural resources. It's home to 22% of world unproven resources of hydrocarbons, 13% of oil, 30% of natural gas, 20% of natural gas condensate. At the same time, 84% is located on the North Sea continental shelf and 16% on the land territory of Arctic states. And by the way, the Yamal-Nenetsk Autonomous District is one of the leading Russian regions in terms of the reserves of hydrocarbons, especially natural gas and oil. On February 21st, 2023, it was very important for the territories of Arctic, Siberian, Far East. And this day, in his remarks to the Federal Assembly, the Russian President Vladimir Putin declared that Russia intends to increase the capabilities of the Northern Sea route, and he offered to develop ecotourism, as well as he amended the law of the fundamentals of the state policy of the Russian Federation Arctic until 2035, and we will organize the Arctic Dictation, which is initiated by the National Park Russian Arctic. And this development of the Arctic navigation through the Northern Sea route for the Russian Federation is especially important for its eastern direction, and first and foremost, it is important due to the dynamic development of Asia-Pacific, which becomes a real engine for global economic growth. The development of the Northern Sea route is essential for Russia, not only as a responsible participant of international economic relations, but as also for ensuring seamless supply chains to our northern regions in order to ensure sustainable development and to improve the well-being of people living there. As of today, the Northern Sea route is operating quite actively and effectively. According to the administration of the Northern Sea route in 2023, 1,219 authorizations were issued to navigate through this water area. If we compare it with 2022, 1,196 authorizations were given, and in 2021, 1,200 those authorizations were issued. Only one application was denied for the Russian flagged ship. The situation in navigation in other water areas and the deterioration of situation there once again stresses the need to diversify international sea routes, including through the Northern Sea route. This is the shortest route from Europe to Asia-Pacific. And we see that transport, logistical, and other companies of Asia, including India and China, are interested in cooperating with Russia in using the Northern Sea route. Russia, as a literal Arctic state, pays close attention to the work of the Northern Sea route, and it continues to do its utmost to ensure the safety of the sea route with the careful treatment of the fragile Arctic ecosystem, implementing the Russian regulatory acts that govern the navigation through the Northern Sea route. The existing procedure of navigation in the water areas of the Northern Sea route are not excessive, are not discriminatory in nature, and they do not obstruct the use of this sea route by foreign vessels. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. How can you comment new economic sanctions that were imposed against Russia by the European Union, and how can they affect the Russian economy? For political elites of the West prefer just to have these limitations. Annalena Baerbock, the foreign minister of Germany, stated a day or 2 days ago, said that when they introduced sanctions, they understood that it won't hinder Russia in pursuing its foreign policy. But nonetheless, sanctions are important. That's why they're developing them. Sanctions are important. That's all they're saying. Different sanctions are necessary for them. And what kind of effect that they have, and what is their impact on the European Union, they prefer not to speak about it. Russia has built sanctions immunity to deal with the Brussels attempt to undermine Russian economy, and these sanctions will have no effect on the course of the special military operation and the pursuit of our foreign policy. Russia is committed to uphold its legitimate interests, especially in the area of security. The EU realizes now that sanctions help to strengthen economic sovereignty of our country. it wasn't our choice. We had another path to follow, but since they've opted for this way, we stemmed from our interests to ensure our financial, technological, and economic sovereignty. Sanctions undermine economic prospects of the EU itself. We have never pursued this goal, and we are unhappy about it, actually. We have always been supporting pan-European, pan-Eurasian content, which would have common goals, common objectives. It would have its own specifics, but we supported the common agenda for cooperation, but the West has made its choice. Unfortunately, the West is following the path of sanctions, and it doesn't move closer to inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia, but they ensure the industrialization of their countries, and they have a lack of resources. So many articles were written that the European Union has used so many measures, unreasonable and inhumane measures. They have put an embargo on a wide range of consumer goods and consumer commodities. But again, they failed to do that. They have harmed themselves and they harmed others, but they failed to reach their goals. The European Union understands that the massive sanctions against Ukraine will result in undermining global food security, but instead they brazenly accused us of provoking this crisis.
So we did not get rid of colonial habits, and we cannot understand in their relations with their third countries the false messages that the Brussels sent from the start do not work with Russia. And now the EU are trying to the sanctions on our global economies. They're now trying to affect the world majority, and they need their own crisis. They need to put an end to their own helplessness. They have no economic growth, and what's there to do? Through those anti-Russian messages, they're trying to slow the global economy. And in the latest anti-Russian packages, we try to impose sanctions on agents from Singapore, Syria, Sri Lanka, Thailand. And the European Union makes it clear that it thinks itself in the power to dictate the rules of trade cooperation between other countries. We're hindering the development of the economies of sovereign states all over the world. We're trying to inflict strategic defeat on Russia, but I can assure you, but in some time, we use the phrases about the insufficient democracy or the commitment to human rights or some kind of Western values will be used as an excuse. We will think of something, but we will still live with economic pressure. And we have no doubt that the peoples of the countries whose business representatives have been targeted by EU sanctions will draw the necessary conclusions about the policy of the European Union and the consequences of its aggressively promoted concept of a rules-based order. To cut a long story short, it's another evidence of the sanctions agony which has begun in the United States, where we have nothing else but it boomerangs the interests of ordinary Europeans. Thank you very much. And another question, another economic questions. How could you comment on the information published by the World Bank about Russia's alleged debt to India? You know, this information is not true. Those numbers which you quoted, we're talking about $774 million. This was either conjured up or post as the amount of the Russian debt to India. They extracted this from a website of the Exim Bank of India, and this was done even though there was information about the proposal sent by the Indian side in 2022 to provide a credit line to the government of Russian Federation, indicating that the relevant agreement has not been signed by the borrower. So this is not true. Okay, let's proceed. Is Ria Novosti here? Ms. Zakharova, good afternoon. Yes, good afternoon. We have two questions. The first question is, Speaker of the Armenian Parliament, Simonyan, believes that Russian bodyguards should leave Yerevan Zvarnov's airport. How does Moscow assess such a statement? Does it reflect the position of the Armenian leadership, and has Yerevan made such a demand to Moscow? We consider this as another example of unfriendly behavior of official Yerevan. However, it isn't entirely clear to what extent the Speaker of the National Assembly is responsible for the topic he raised. We have not received any appeals from the Armenian authorities in this regard. We understand that the story is about not stems from the previous insinuations around the Russian Dmitry Strakov. I can assure you that no illegal actions have been committed by Russian representatives. We always respect the national legislation of sovereign states. Okay. And the last question, yes, please. Sorry. On February 25th this year, the head of the Moldovan border police stated that if the president of the Russian Federation came to Moldova, restrictive measures would be taken against him in the pursuance of an arrest warrant